You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get started with the show this week, it certainly has been a week to remember across the United States as protests and demonstrations continue after the murder of George Floyd. And while I'm not going to make a political statement by any stretch of the imagination, I will say that the military is the one place where we really preach and learn true diversity. You know, we are forced to serve with people who come from all walks of life, from all over the world, and they are part of our great military. And in that, we learn to serve alongside those people and form bonds that last a lifetime. That's not by accident, everybody. It's because of what we do, how we do it, and how we treat each other. And that is a lesson that we can pass on to other Americans, that we understand what it means to love the person next to you and offer your life up to the person next to you, because that's exactly what our job is. So that is a message I think that we can send out to everybody across America, and we can continue to show the world why we are the greatest fighting force, but also why we are a great example of diversity. With that, we want to continue to grow this Hazard Ground community. Make sure you guys subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're already past 1,000 subscribers. Let's get it up to 2. As well, follow us on all the other social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Keep up with the show and certainly be able to reach out to us on any of those mediums, and we'll respond to you guys. Finally, our promotion with Amazon, you know about it. You've heard us talk about it plenty of times before. Go to our website, hazardground.com. Click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. Do all of your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and we'll donate it right back to some of the great charities you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. So again, we hope everybody is staying safe, everybody is healthy and well, and we are continuing to spread that message of diversity to all of our fellow Americans. God be with everybody. And now on to this week's episode. And joining us this week on the podcast is a retired Marine who had 2 deployments, one to Iraq and one to Afghanistan, where he was injured in his second deployment to Afghanistan. After recovering from his injuries, he went on to be a bronze medalist in the Paralympics. He ran multiple marathons, concluded a cross-country bike ride, and is currently running for Congress in Virginia's 10th Congressional District. He is Rob Jones, joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Rob, welcome, brother. Thanks for being here, man.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity to come talk to you.
All right, certainly know your time is precious because we are in an election year, so you got a lot to do, and I certainly thank you for spending some time with us today. But let's start back at the beginning, because actually you were a college graduate before you got into the military. So kind of what was the reasoning behind why you should have shifted gears?
I was on my way to being a college graduate. I actually joined during my junior year at Virginia Tech, and I was about 20 years old, and I had gotten to a point down at Virginia Tech where I wasn't doing that great in my preferred major, which was computer science, and I felt lonely, and I felt a little bit like a failure, and I felt isolated, and I felt like there were things missing from my life that I couldn't figure out what they were. And then a buddy of mine had just joined the Marine Corps the year before, and so I started researching a little bit about the Marine Corps to see what it was all about. And during the process of that, I read this book called Brotherhood of Heroes about the Battle of Peleliu in World War II. And that book just struck a chord with me when I finished it. And, I read about these Marines who are willing to put their lives on the line for their brothers and for their country. And I realized the pieces that were missing from my life were courage, brotherhood, and selflessness, and other things like that. And so I think the next day after I finished reading that book, I went down to the recruiter's office, and he wasn't there. The Marine Corps recruiter wasn't there. And then on my way out, the Air Force recruiter tried to lure me into his office, but I had already decided on the Marine Corps at that point. So do me a favor and get the Marine Corps recruiter to call me when he comes in. And he did, and I think I was at MEPS maybe a week later before telling my parents.
What did the Air Force recruiter say to you to try to sway you?
I think he probably noticed that I, was determined to join the Marine Corps, so he didn't really try particularly hard. But I think he said, Sergeant Kane's not here right now, but if you want to come in here, I can tell you a little bit about the Air Force if you want. And I said, no, I've decided Marine Corps is what I want. And he just said, all right, yeah, I'll have Sergeant Kane call you. As long as they get a guy in the military, I don't think they really care that much.
Right. So you had done your research on the Marine Corps. When you went to boot camp, was it everything you thought it was going to be?
It was, I was excited I just wanted to be a Marine, and, I did the 92-day reserve program with the intention of finishing college and then applying to OCS. And so, I had a half a semester or a full semester to prepare. I did the delayed entry program, so I was doing these, pulley events once a month, running, doing pull-ups, just preparing myself to be a Marine. And I read a couple books about boot camp, watched videos, all this stuff. And so when I got there, I kind of knew what it was going to be like. So it didn't surprise me that much. The hardest part about boot camp for me was not being able to go to the bathroom whenever I wanted to, because they make you drink so much water.
Yeah.
And it's just having to hold your pee for 3 months straight.
Now, you enlisted as a combat engineer, correct?
Yeah, so the reserve unit that I joined that was right up the road in Roanoke, Virginia from Blacksburg was a combat engineer unit. So, they just put me in as that.
Okay, so is that what you wanted to do, or it was just because you were going to be stationed close to home?
I don't remember really having much of a
say?
A desire for any particular job. I think I just
Gotcha.
wanted to do something where I was going to be fighting. So I think I was interested in tanks. I was interested in being a radio operator with the intention, maybe I would be a radio guy for, a line unit or something. And then they said, well, the reserve unit closest to you is combat engineer, so you just have to be a combat engineer. And I was like, okay.
Now, we had 2 wars going on at this point in time. Any objections from family, friends, loved ones? Did they think you were crazy for wanting to do this, especially being so close to finishing college?
Yeah, probably. I mean, when I told my dad, I think he said, I said, Dad, I joined the Marine Corps. And he said, why? that kind of tone. But everybody that I told, I said, this is the reason. And the reason was what I told you. And they just said, okay, and then obviously they were concerned, but they were proud of me, and they accepted the reason that I wanted to do it, and we all moved on. I was 20 years old, so I didn't have to get permission or anything. But everybody was proud of me, I think.
All right, so you signed
but
up.
Obviously concerned.
No, yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense. You signed up in 2007, and it's basically a year or a little bit more than a year later, you end up in Iraq, correct?
Yeah, well, I joined in 2006 technically, but
Okay.
2008 we were in Iraq, yeah. But I mean, I volunteered for that deployment in 2007 when I was in combat engineer school. So the way I did it was 92-day reserve is you do boot camp during summer, and then go back to college, and then you finish the rest of your, basic training, so MCT and job school the next summer. So when I was at MCT and job school, my reserve unit was taking volunteers to go to Iraq in 2008, so I volunteered.
All right, so does that mean like you didn't have to go look for a job? Did this work out where right after you graduated, you went on to deploy? Was it like the timing that convenient, so to speak?
Not quite. Well, no, actually, yeah.
Because I was just wondering,
So
I mean, you graduated college, so you didn't have to go look for, you were looking for jobs, like, because you were reserve, so were you looking for jobs on the outside world, or what
No,
was going
I
on?
wasn't. Yeah, so it did work out. It did work out that, so I graduated, and, I went to college on student loans and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I had money. I didn't work during college. But I joined, and then summer of 2007, went to job school and all that stuff, so I was getting a paycheck from the Marine Corps. And then I think my unit went to 29 Palms to do our workup August of 2007. So yeah, I kind of went from job school directly to the deployment. So yeah, I didn't have to worry about working until after I got back.
What were you told leading up
Iraq.
to that deployment as far as mission set? What were you going to be doing? Did you know where you were going to be going? What do you remember?
We knew we were going to be going to Habaniya, Iraq.
Okay.
I think once we got to 29 Palms, they were like, all right, we're going to a place called Habaniya. And so we started looking up videos and that kind of thing. And Habaniya was pretty It's close to Ramadi and Fallujah, so it was pretty hot back in, when those battles were going on.
But 07, 08, yeah.
Yeah, when we got to Habbaniyah, it had been pretty well pacified. So the mission, we didn't know exactly what the mission was going to be. We were kind of going off of what our senior Marines had experienced in 2005 on their deployment to somewhere now, I think HIT and a couple other places. And so, when we got there, it was primarily building Iraqi police stations and doing a lot of weapons cache sweeps. So, my fire team would get pushed out to a FOB for a few months, and we just run operations with those, with the infantry units that were out there. And they would just take us along as their weapons cache, finding, people. So they'd cordon off an area, and me and another guy would just take our metal detectors and sweep every square inch of that area until we either decided there wasn't anything there, or we found whatever weapons cache was buried there.
All right, a couple of things here. You mentioned the Marines who were before you. 05, 06 is when all those Marines were, savagely killed in Fallujah and Ramadi, and the bridge incident. You guys can Google it if you don't know what I'm talking about, but most people do. So you had that in your mind. Plus, you're going out there looking for IEDs, so to speak, as the most dangerous form of, what the enemy is doing to us. Any of this sort of bring out any fear in you at all about what you were about to enter?
Yeah, I mean, we were expecting on that deployment, based on what our seniors were saying, we were expecting to be slinging lead left and right, and IED strikes all over the place. And it's kind of one of those things where a person knows that it's going to be a dangerous situation, and you could be killed or you could be maimed, and you could lose some friends. But when you're going into it, you can't really think like that. You kind of have to put that aside and say, well, I also have to have this attitude. Well, it's not going to be me. Because if you go into it thinking that it's going to be you that gets killed, you're just going to be pretty much not very operationally effective. And so you have to put those thoughts aside and just do your job. And, whatever comes will come. So I don't remember feeling a whole lot of fear leading up to it. But there was that kind of expectation that we were going to be doing some fighting. And to be honest with you, I wanted to get in some firefights just like any other Marine, because I know that's where the brotherhood comes from. That's where the courage comes from. That's where the selflessness comes from. Those are the things that I was pursuing.
When you are on this deployment and you're searching for IEDs and everything else, does any one stick out that you find that you remember, like any one particular situation stay with you?
Well, there weren't really any IED finds in Iraq. I guess the one that would stick out to me was the one strike that there was where 2 Marines were killed, and that was the only IED strike that we experienced on the entire time. So that would probably be, and I wasn't involved with that one. That happened. I wasn't there, so that would. That strike kind of came kind of mid-deployment after we realized things weren't as hectic as we thought they were going to be. And that kind of brought it back home so that we knew, it's not quite as kinetic as we were thinking, but you can still be killed out here and you can still be hurt. It just takes that instant, one guy shoots at you and it hits you, or there's an old IED buried somewhere. So that kind of brought it back to reality.
The guys that were killed, you didn't know them? There was nothing sort of, personal attachment to you?
No, I didn't really know them personally all that well. I probably had done a couple things with them in the workup and maybe a couple operations or something like that. But I didn't really know them on a personal level. A couple of the other engineers did, but I didn't really know them that well.
I'm always curious about how it hits people. The guys who did know him well that you knew, what was their reaction to it?
Well, a couple of the guys that knew him had to go out there and help, help do the cleanup.
Oh, really?
Of the blast, yeah. And so I have no doubt that that affects them to this day, just having to see those images. And the engineers, my buddy Ronnie and my other buddy Daniel, they were the ones that were kind of helping out the infantry that day, and they kind of took it upon themselves to do a lot of the more morbid stuff, because they realized that the infantry guys were even closer to those two Marines that were killed. So they just wanted to do anything they could to help reduce the trauma there. But I mean, it's to put it in civilian terms for people. It's not a whole lot different from if a friend gets killed in a car accident. It's out of the blue, out of nowhere, and then you have to go clean up their body.
Yeah.
So it's just that kind of level, and obviously an IED blast is going to be
messy,
just so much more, nasty and that kind of situation than a car accident. So that's kind of what it's like. It comes out of the blue. You don't expect it at all, and then when it hits you, this is your best friend, and just in an instant they're gone.
As far as that first deployment was concerned, when does it get to kind of be routine for you looking for IEDs and things of that nature? Because, I mean, I'd imagine at the beginning there's a little bit of nerves involved in it, but then it starts to kind of settle in and becomes routine. Was that the case for you?
It didn't take long, a month and a half or something before, where not a whole lot really was going on. And like I said, we weren't in Iraq. We really weren't looking for IEDs that much, if at all. So our main job was doing these weapons cache sweeps, and we knew that the weapons caches could possibly be booby trapped, but we hadn't found any that were.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the feeling of danger significantly reduced after that first month and a half, where you just have this pattern of just finding buried weapons that aren't really dangerous or anything, and you're not going out on IED sweeps. You're not getting in any firefights. So, you try not to get complacent, obviously, but at the same time, you kind of get into this routine. And then, the level of danger feels a lot less than it was when you first got there.
All right, so you get back from Iraq. When, month and year time frame is this?
So we were Iraq from January 2008 to August 2008.
Okay. So to that end, you now have to go back to your regular life, right? Because you're a civilian. You're not active duty as part of the reserve. So what's next for you?
Pretty much. I mean, I didn't really have a regular life established at that point because, I graduated college. And so I really hadn't had a chance to establish anything that you would call a regular life. So, and I didn't have a place to live or anything. So, I just lived with my parents for a couple weeks. And I just found an apartment in Blacksburg and started looking for work, sort of. I didn't look that hard, partly because I had a big, kitty built up from the deployment, money. So I had a lot of savings to live off of. And I also knew that my unit was going to be sending a unit to a volunteer platoon to Afghanistan relatively soon. So I kind of knew that I was going to be deploying relatively quickly. I didn't know exactly when. So I didn't look that hard for a job. I just kind of, put some applications out there just for something that I knew wouldn't be a long-term occupation. And I found something maybe 3-4 months before we ended up deploying. I was putting out road counting devices for it was a company contracted by VDOT. So every time you run over these little tubes in the road and you see a little box off to the side, that's what I would go out and put those out. And then we'd go out and collect them, and they're just kind of doing road studies and that kind of thing.
Yeah, aren't they testing for how fast people are driving?
It measures it, but it doesn't. it's not like it's, you're going to get a ticket off of it. It's
No, yeah, I know.
using it as data.
But that's
data
what I'm saying.
collection.
They're trying to see how fast people are driving through a certain area, if it needs a stop sign or a speed bump or whatever, right?
That's part of what they're doing. So they're getting the speed, they're getting the class of vehicle. So whether it's a 2-axle vehicle or however many axles are on it, how many vehicles are on a certain road. So they just get the data so they have it based so they can decide, when they're going to be doing road maintenance and that kind of thing on the roads. So It's just data collection.
Okay. Anyway, I was just curious. All right. So
yeah. So don't worry, you're not going to be getting a ticket or anything when you go for this thing.
So you start work up for your second deployment, and when did they tell you you're going to Afghanistan? Did you know this ahead of time?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, when I volunteered, we knew I was pretty certain it was going to be an Afghanistan deployment. They obviously didn't know for sure. I don't really remember what I was thinking, what I knew at that time. I just knew that supposedly we were going to go to Afghanistan. I knew that Afghanistan was more kinetic than Iraq at that time, and so I knew I wanted to go. And I knew that my buddies were volunteering as well, so we all kind of wanted to stick together and do the same thing. But nothing was official. But we just that's kind of what we were hoping for, and that's kind of what we were expecting.
Gotcha. So when do you get to Afghanistan?
So we do the workup for Afghanistan in the winter of 2009, and then we get to Afghanistan April of 2010 when we got there. So we kind of did this workup maybe starting in late December 2009, and did a workup all the way until right before April. So then we get to Afghanistan April 2010, yeah.
All right. What was your mission there this time around?
Yeah, similar in terms of its scope. So it's basically combat engineer that's attached to an infantry battalion. And we have the metal detectors. We have the expertise in IED detection, weapons cache detection, explosives. So basically, those are our expertises, and however the infantry wants to use those, we do that. And so in Afghanistan, a lot of the IEDs that are getting made are made from homemade explosives. So there's not a whole lot of weapons caches around to find. So we weren't really looking for weapons caches this time. So our primary role in Afghanistan was the IED detection, route clearance angle of things.
Did you feel on this deployment that you were much more prepared than you were on your first, even though the environment was going to be different?
Yeah, definitely. Just because I had that first deployment under my belt. So in terms of, having your, being able to get your gear together, being able to react in stressful situations, and just having more life experience and more experience as a Marine. And obviously I was a team leader on this one. So there's always something new that you're doing that you've never done before. But in terms of IED detection, not as much, because we didn't get to do a whole lot of IED detection in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And then the IEDs were so different than the ones in Iraq as well. So that was still something that nobody really had a lot of experience with outside of training.
All right. So what's day-to-day life like? You get there in April, and you don't get injured till July. So kind of give me the routine as you were going through it, because it kind of just sets the stage for, the events leading up to what happened to you.
Yeah. So when we first got there, we were in a place called Delaram. And so it was actually pretty similar to what we were doing in Iraq, where the engineers got pushed out to all these different FOBs where there was either a platoon-sized infantry unit or a company-sized infantry unit there, and they were just running security operations in the area. And I think there's maybe 1 or 2 firefights. There was a few IED finds, none where I was. yeah, it was basically just pretty well pacified in the area that we were in, and so we were just kind of in this holding pattern a little bit. So what we were going to be doing was kind of securing this Delaram area, passing that over to the Georgian Army, and then we were going to move to to this place called Sangin that the British had been in charge of. We were going to take over from them and start pushing into Taliban territory and start seizing some Taliban strongholds over there. So the first 2-3 months were this Delaram, kind of how you have your established fob, and you're doing security patrols, twice a day. And then while we waited to go and do these pushes.
Just out of curiosity, what was more stressful or tense for you, the firefights or trying to find the IEDs?
Probably, it's hard to say. I would say getting shot at might have been a little bit more stressful.
I would think so.
It's hard to say. I mean, it's pretty equal. They're both stressful. I'll say that.
Yeah, no, it's just different types of stress. I mean, let me phrase it this way: where did you feel like you had more control? In a firefight, or
I think probably, obviously, I think I felt like I had more control in the IED detection.
Sure, yeah, that's what I would lean towards. I guess that's kind of just a better way to phrase it and look at it, because as unpredictable as combat can be, I guess there is some sort of sanity in knowing exactly what you're doing step by step in trying to figure out if something is an IED or not.
Yeah, but then at the same time, we kind of knew that the Taliban that we were fighting wasn't really that good at firefighting, so they would just kind of shoot at us from 1,000 yards away,
Mm-hmm.
And they would try and launch mortars and that kind of thing, and so it didn't really feel like we were in that much danger when they were shooting at us. But they were really good at hiding IEDs, so yeah, it's hard to say. I wouldn't say one was more stressful than the other.
Okay, so July 22nd, 2010. What is that day like? Is it when you wake up? Is it a normal morning? Is it sort of routine? Take me through the events.
So, like I said, we moved into Sangin and taken over from the Brits. And what we were doing was we're doing these things called pushes. You basically just take all your guys and you start walking into Taliban territory. And if they decide to shoot at you, you shoot back and kill them, or shoot back until they retreat. And then you just keep moving forward. And then what we would do is just seize compounds. So on these pushes, we would launch line charges to get through these IED belts that we had identified through intelligence, and clear them out with mine rakes and mine rollers and that kind of thing. We'd walk through there, and then the combat engineer role would be to sweep the compounds that we were going into, check the entrances, and check it all out to make sure that there weren't any IEDs buried in there. And then once we kind of did that, we would get set up and start kind of digging in with these compounds and putting sandbags up and getting them set up as forward operating bases. And then we would spend a couple weeks doing security patrols. So we did one of these pushes, established ourselves, did a couple weeks of security patrols, and then we were doing this second push, and that's what July 22nd of 2010 was. And so it was sort of normal in that we had done this process before with the push and seizing compounds and all that. But it wasn't like we did this every day. This is only the second time we had done it in this area. So basically I was attached to a squad that was providing security for a vehicle column. And so our job was basically just to kind of skirt along the outside of the vehicle column, looking out for ambushes that may be laying in wait for it. And I think around 1 o'clock, we laid down to take a rest, stood back up, and our point man stepped on an IED that malfunctioned, did a low order detonation, so just a blasting cap exploded, didn't initiate the main charge of the IED. And so, as you know, as most people know, where there's one IED, there's probably 2 or 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that became an area where we figured there was pretty much definitely going to be an IED. It was kind of like a little bit like in the movies where you have to make your way through a minefield. So it's kind of, not exactly the same thing, but it was essentially this little mini minefield that we had to walk through. And so that's my specialty, is getting us through that area. And so, immediately I got my metal detector out and started working through that area and trying to find us a route when I stepped on the IED that worked the secondary or the tertiary or whatever it was.
When you step on it, what do you remember feeling?
Well, I was immediately knocked unconscious for about 20 seconds. So, it was kind of like I was doing my job one instant, and then I'm immediately teleported to this other state of being where I'm on my back, and all I can hear is my own screaming and this really loud ringing in my ears. All I can see is a blurry tunnel, that goes up to this bright blue sky. What I smelled and I tasted, I just smelled and tasted dust. And there's kind of a distinct smell from a recent explosion that you can kind of pick up.
Yeah.
This kind of chemically stench. So I could smell that. And then my legs felt like, they'd fallen asleep, but magnified by about, a couple hundred times. So it's kind of this painful numbness that I felt in my legs. And so that's kind of the first 30 seconds after I wake up, is just this screaming, I'm feeling all these things. And then after a short period of that, my body started to get control again. And I guess endorphins, started to go through. So I kind of calmed down, and then my senses started to come back. And that's when, my fellow Marines were yelling out to me that they were coming, that I was going to be okay, and all these things. And then they came over to me and started doing they did tourniquets. The corpsman eventually got there and gave me morphine and put one of those little nose tubes into my nose so it could clear my airway. And then, they just kind of got me ready. Got me onto a stretcher, got me fixed, not necessarily fixed up, but stopped the bleeding. Got me as stabilized as I was going to be. Got a stretcher, took me to a tank, and that's when they put me unconscious again for good. And then, from what I understand, the tank went and met a helicopter and then did a casevac.
Do you remember talking to anybody? Remember asking any questions?
Yeah. So when I first woke up, screaming, and then once everybody got over there, they gave me the morphine that kind of loosened my lips a little bit to start talking. And so my first concern was the status of my groin area. And so actually the first thing I checked was my hands, and I saw that they were fine. I had all my fingers. And then I felt between my legs to see this, check the status down there. Like most men probably do.
Rob, it's funny that you bring that up, because that's one of the anecdotal things I found out from 3 years of doing this podcast. Of everybody who gets blown up, every male who gets blown up, the first thing you check is your junk, because that's the one non-negotiable, right? I can live without legs. I can live without arms. If you take that away, we have a whole different set of problems that we need to discuss.
I think that is the general feeling with most men.
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't want to be half the man you used to be.
My
literally.
heart certainly goes out to the guys that experience that kind of injury. I'm lucky that when I felt down there, and it was very numb. So my assumption was, it was missing. Things were missing down there, and so that was kind of the first thing that I said. It was like, I think it's gone. And this guy Johnson he said, you're fine. You're fine down there. In fact, I can touch it for you if you want. And that made me laugh a little bit at the same time. And then, so at that point I said, are my legs amputated above or below the knee? And they said they're a couple inches below. And then at that point I actually asked them to go ahead and kill me. I said, I don't really want to live like this, so just put a bullet through my grape and just put me out of my misery. And that was based on I was obviously high on morphine at the same time and shock. and that was based on a very naive assumption about what life is like as an amputee. And so, but by the time I left, they said, obviously they said they weren't going to do it. And by the time I left, when I woke up again, there hasn't been a single time that I've considered taking that avenue. And so that's pretty much everything I remember.
So when you wake up next, where are you? Germany? Are you back in the States? What do you remember?
Germany, yeah. You're not supposed to wake up in Germany. In fact, I was really only there overnight.
There's a lot of people who, by the way, you're not alone. There's a lot of guys I've talked to who have woke up in Germany.
Yeah, from what I understand, you're not really supposed to wake up there, but I did very briefly. And when I was there, my squad leader just happened to be there for his own injuries, minor injuries. So he was there, and that's where he kind of broke the news to me officially, that I was above the knee, amputated. Because a lot of the times, the infections necessitate higher levels of amputations, or there's no viable tissue left below the knee. So they just, in order to wear prosthetics, they know that you just have to amputate where you can. So he tells me that, and then on his way out, I asked him to find a funny hat for me, because I was thinking, at that point, I was thinking about the other people in my life, and I thought, my mom is going to be absolutely devastated. So maybe if when I show up and she sees me for the first time, if I'm wearing a stupid hat, she will
won't focus on your legs.
She'll laugh at that hat. Yeah, she'll see this and be like, "What the heck is this?" It'll just help to take the edge off a little bit. But they weren't able to find one, believe it or not, in a trauma hospital. But when I got to Bethesda 3 days later, they rolled me out of an ambulance, and my mom's there, and she had a pirate hat for me.
Oh, that's nice.
So it all kind of worked out in the end. I think my plan kind of succeeded. I don't know if it was somebody had told her that I'd asked for that, or how exactly that came to be. But mission accomplished there, I guess.
So, were there any other injuries that you were aware of other than your legs?
Not initially.
Okay.
I mean, there really weren't any, to be perfectly honest. I just had some shrapnel wounds to my buttocks and some burns on my hands. But really, besides that, and I think I had a grade 3 concussion or whatever. But besides that, those really are my only injuries. And then I had to have a colostomy due to my rear end injuries. They didn't want any kind of fecal matter getting into those wounds.
Gotcha.
And so they did a colostomy on me, but I didn't have any intestinal injuries or anything. It was just out of kind of necessity to make sure that my other wounds stay clean.
Hey everybody, just a quick pause from the podcast to give you a word about my friends at My Front Page Story. Look, Father's Day is coming up, and if your dad is anything like mine, your dad loves the newspaper. I think everybody's dad loves the newspaper. Well, give him the cover story he deserves for being such an awesome dad at myfrontpagestory.com. Guys, I did this for my mother on Mother's Day, and I can tell you she was so emotionally moved by what My Front Page Story does. It is the absolute perfect gift for Father's Day as well. Telling your dad you had a story written about him as a gift for Father's Day is pretty much the coolest thing you can tell someone when giving a gift. Watching him read it and trying not to get choked up, just like my mom did, will be even better. What happens is you'll talk to a writer for about 10 minutes about your dad, and they'll write an amazing story about him and send it to you, and he will love it. I guarantee you it is an absolute win of a gift. So instead of going the old route for Father's Day, socks, a tie, a gift card, give him something that he'll actually remember forever, and go to myfrontpagestory.com and be sure to use the promo code HazardGround20. Once again, myfrontpagestory.com and the promo code HazardGround20 to set up an interview today to tell the story about your dad on Father's Day. myfrontpagestory.com and the promo code HazardGround20. Now back to this week's episode. When you look down at your legs for the first time, what do you remember seeing?
They're just totally wrapped up in gauze. So yeah, when I woke up, I looked down and it was just basically just, you can see where the bumps of your legs are, the bumps of your thighs are, and then, there's no bump where the rest of your legs should be. And then, they were just kind of wrapped up in gauze, and they had tubes coming out of them that went to wound vac machines.
How many surgeries did you end up having to fight off the infection and everything else? As far as, amputations, did they have to keep cutting more off, or?
They didn't keep cutting more off, really. They just did a series of debridement surgeries, which really weren't that serious. I think I was going in for surgery every other day for the first month. So I probably had something like 20 surgeries. But the biggest surgery they did on me, I think I might have still had my kneecap on my left leg, and then I have very vague. I don't know if I have very vague memories of this. I think I had my kneecap over there, and then I think they took that off. And then the other major surgery that I had was a skin graft from my left thigh to the inside of my right thigh, because I was missing a bunch of skin on the inside of my right thigh, so they had to put the skin on there. Those are kind of the two biggest operations I had. But every other one was just putting me unconscious and kind of clearing away non-viable tissue or infected tissue.
Gotcha. All right. So now the rehab portion starts.
Yeah.
In retrospect, when you look back on it, how difficult was this whole thing?
The rehab, psychologically, I didn't find it to be particularly difficult because I have a natural ability to accept the situation that I'm in and just move on with what I need to get accomplished. So I never really struggled too much psychologically. The hardest part, from a psychological standpoint for me, was being in a wheelchair, and not being totally self-sufficient. So if I wanted to go out to the movie theater, I'd have to get a ride from a buddy, and I'd have to wheel up to their side of their car, and they'd have to take my wheelchair and put it in their trunk. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and I remember one time she had this really small car, so we put my wheelchair in her trunk, and it kind of got stuck because of my wheelchair, and then she had to go back there for like a half hour trying to get it unstuck, and I'm just sitting there in the car, not able to help. So things like that were the most difficult psychologically, but that wasn't, that improved every day, and then improved drastically once I started having prosthetics that I could walk around with.
It's interesting that you say that psychologically it wasn't difficult, because many of the people I've talked to say the psychological part is the more difficult than the physical part.
Yeah, a little bit of an anomaly, I think.
Okay.
In terms of that, I hesitate to say it, but I almost was a little bit excited when I woke up, because I don't know, there was part of me that was like just sitting there thinking, well, this has happened, and I was almost a little bit excited to see what I could do with prosthetics, and excited to have this little almost project to work on, relearning how to walk and figuring how far I can take prosthetics and see what I could learn and that kind of thing. So I was almost a little bit excited about the situation. Obviously, I would have preferred to have my legs and everything, but knowing that there's no going back from that point, I kind of got a little bit excited to see what I could do with the prosthetics. So the most difficult part for me, and when I say the rehab was physically grueling, it was, and that's not particularly difficult. It's just, it's like going in for 2 workouts every day, with a little bit of extra pain, kind of injury type pain that you have to endure. So yeah, and there were frustrations along the way from a psychological standpoint of, trying to figure out how to learn stuff and practice things and not getting it on the first time and having to try and fail. But yeah, I mean, the physical aspect of it was, just pretend like you're training for a marathon or something, and then you have to do two workouts every day, 6 days a week or 5 days a week. And that kind of describes the physical grueling aspect of it, where it hurts, but it just hurts because you're doing a workout, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I was pretty used to doing workouts, and I really enjoyed doing workouts. And so I really enjoyed physical therapy because I was working out. I was working out 5 days a week, and learn how to use these prosthetics.
Do you remember the first day that you kind of were walking again and felt comfortable for the first time?
I remember the first time I walked, and it was quite painful because my legs were still very sensitive, and they're not used to wearing prosthetics, and there's a lot of spots that you have to figure out where the leg is putting pressure on certain points of your stump. So that was pretty painful. But that's kind of like, almost like having blisters or something on your foot or on your knee or something like that. And so it's a little bit like that kind of pain. Or having a sprained ankle that you're trying to walk on might be a better.
Mm-hmm.
So that level of pain. I think the first time I felt really confident walking around was it was probably 3 months in, and it was in order to graduate to using bionic knees, you had to be able to walk from the outpatient housing called the Malone House to the physical therapy clinic and back without using canes. And so I just decided I wanted to try this one day on a Sunday, I think, and I did it. And then when I got back from that, that's when I started to feel like I'm going to be able to walk, everywhere I go without using a wheelchair, without using canes, and I'm going to be able to do this. And then so that's kind of the first day I remember feeling really confident about my walking ability.
And the only reason I asked that is because, as the old saying goes, you have to walk before you can run, which leads you to,
Exactly.
running a whole bunch of marathons and actually becoming a bronze medalist in the Paralympics. But that was actually in rowing. But to that end, mm-hmm. When do you get to a point where you're feeling like, all right, well, I've now graduated to where I can be competitive at these things?
I started learning how to row. Let me think. I found out about the Paralympics when I was in that first month after I got injured, because I was just in bed researching sports that I could do. I liked working out, and so I kind of identified my injury as an opportunity to maybe live the life of an athlete. I'd always been kind of interested in that. So it was kind of my opportunity to live the life of an athlete. And so I started looking up disabled sports, and I found rowing, and turns out rowing was in the Paralympics. And I remember rowing was really difficult from doing workouts on the rowing machine. And so I kind of had that in the back of my mind. And it turned out there was a place where I could learn this thing called para-rowing nearby in D.C. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind as I started the recovery process and rehab. And that took me through, fall and winter time. And then once I kind of got confident walking, that's when I started going for rowing lessons. And things just kind of fell into place, I took naturally to it. I really enjoyed it. And it just so happened my rowing coach knew another double knee amputee athlete named Oksana that also wanted to go to the Paralympics and loved rowing. And we kind of we got together one time, we rowed together, and we rowed really well together. And so all these things kind of snowballed into, by the time I retired, we had decided that we were going to try and make the Paralympics in 2012. And it just so worked out, the Paralympics were the next year in 2012. And so that's when once I retired, is when I started seriously training for the Paralympics. But I had made a decision that we were going to try and do that probably in fall, maybe in September of 2011.
Well, this is crazy because let me just give people the timeline here. July 22nd, 2010 is the date of your injury. And the 2012 Paralympics, which you competed in, were late summer, August, September timeframe of 2012, just 2 years and a month later. Like, that's an insane amount of time to be at that level and turn it around.
Yeah, I had a pretty quick turnaround from when I lost all my muscle mass, obviously, in fall of 2010. And then so I had to regain all that back and learn how to row and do all these things. I will tell you that it's a little bit easier to do that at the Paralympic level, to kind of have that quick of a turnaround, because there aren't as many athletes that are trying to compete at the Paralympic level. So you can get to the Paralympic level a little bit faster, and that doesn't mean that in order to win, you don't have to train at the same intensity and with the same intellect and same dedication as Olympic athletes. But if you look at the sport of rowing, for example, when I did trials to determine the national team, there were 2 boats that were racing in the trials race to determine the national team in 2012. Whereas if you go to the Olympic side of things, there were probably 30 different doubles that were all trying to get that one spot. So that, there is a smaller pool of athletes in the Paralympic category versus the Olympic category that does allow you to kind of have this little bit faster of a turnaround like that. But, when we were training, you compare our training to that of Olympic training. It took the same dedication and attention to detail and all that stuff as it would for an Olympic athlete.
So you also start running at an extremely competitive level, and you went so far as to complete 31 full 26.2 mile marathons in 31 days in 31 cities. Now, for somebody who's healthy, that's maniacal. So what prompted this? Like, I mean, and I skipped actually the bike ride because that happened chronologically first. So after you become a bronze medalist in rowing, then you decide to bike cross country. Like, what's misfiring in your head at this point?
What was misfiring is that I realized that rowing, as much as I enjoyed it, and it helped me to regain self-confidence and self-reliance in my physical abilities, there wasn't a whole lot of selfless purpose behind it. There wasn't a whole lot of meaning behind rowing, besides just, going to a race every year and trying to win. And my purpose in life was to, find the selflessness and courage and brotherhood that I've been seeking when I joined the Marine Corps. And so I knew that I was going to need something else in order to satisfy that. So I thought that maybe doing this incredible endurance challenge could be my way of accomplishing that goal. And so I had learned how to ride a bike in physical therapy, and I was the first double above knee amputee to go through Walter Reed, that had ever figured out how to ride a bike on my own. And then also I think I was one of 2 double above knee amputees in the whole world that could do that. That could actually mount and dismount a bicycle and ride it around, on my own with no help. And so I wanted to put that skill to use. And so what I decided to do was do a cross-country bike ride and also raise money for veteran charities at the same time.
Tell me about bike riding across the country, because, as soon as you hear going cross-country, everybody immediately thinks Forrest Gump, right, when he's just running. But the path, I mean, what was it like? Where were you guys stopping? Where were you sleeping? What's this whole experience?
So I decided I wanted to make it a diagonal trip. So we started October of 2013, and I started in Bar Harbor, Maine. And so what I did was I rode down the coast from Bar Harbor to Richmond, Virginia, and then I rode straight across from Richmond to San Francisco, and then I rode from San Francisco down to Camp Pendleton, and that was the completion of the ride. And I did that because I didn't want anybody to be able to say, sure, he rode across the country, but he could have done it, in a longer fashion. Like you could ride across from North Florida to Los Angeles. But somebody could say, yeah, but he could have rode across the middle, or he could have rode across it. So I didn't want anybody to be able to apply any kind of buts to what I did. So that's why I did this diagonal trip. And I did it in the wintertime because I knew I was going to be riding in the winter at some point, and I figured that'd just be... Well, actually, I did it in the wintertime because I tend to overheat in the summertime, so I figured the wintertime it'd be more difficult in its own way, but it would probably be a little bit better for me. And then the way it would work would be I would ride between 30 and 35 miles a day, and my little brother, who was 18, he drove a U-Haul box truck that I had bought that had probably 250,000 miles on it, and we put rugs in the back and camping cots and stuffed it full of food and supplies, and he would just drive that thing behind me, kind of protecting me from traffic and also a little bit of an advertisement for what I was doing. And most drivers didn't really mind getting stuck behind us when they passed me. And then at the end of the day, I would just kind of find a good stopping point to pull over, and we would load my bike in the back of the U-Haul truck. And usually over the course of the day, we would have seen somewhere that would be a good place to camp, and we would just drive the truck to that place, like a church parking lot or a school parking lot on a weekend or a vacant lot or something like that. And we'd just park up and we'd sleep in the back. And that was for the first month, but then eventually my volunteer team got really good at calling ahead of where I was going to be and contacting hotels and convincing them to let us stay there for free for the night. And so the vast majority of the time we were staying in free hotels, but we still had that option of the staying in the truck if we had to. And we just kind of followed that pattern. I think every 10th day I would take a day off, up and down, mountain after mountain after mountain.
Yeah.
Until just 181 days and 5,181 miles until the finish line.
Most beautiful sight that you looked at while pedaling that you remember?
Probably South Utah, for a variety of reasons. At that point, let's see, it's just a beautiful area to begin with. I had never been in that. I forget which national park we were riding through, but it was this 100-mile stretch of pretty much no cell service, no towns. So we were camping out in the truck, and it was kind of the first warm weather we had since December. This is the polar vortex year, so since December of 2013. This was probably early March 2014 that I was riding through Utah. So it was the first warm weather. I was riding in a t-shirt, and it was just really cool. Great views, camping out, in the middle of this state park every night. And so I'd say that was probably the most beautiful part of it. And then obviously the finish line.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, if this wasn't enough, you decided to run 31 marathons in 31 days.
Yeah, that was in fall of 2017. That was just a way of kind of continuing that mission. I tried to make the Paralympics again in 2016 triathlon, but I wasn't successful. And over the course of that time, I kind of rediscovered my natural talent for running. I'd always been pretty good at it. And during the course of my triathlon training, I decided I was going to run the Marine Corps Marathon just for fun. And I did pretty well. The only distance I had run in training for it was 5K. And I was able to do this marathon in like 4 hours and 4.25 hours. And so I was like, yeah, I might actually be pretty good at the marathon distance. And I was able to get my 5K time down to 18 minutes flat.
Wow.
Which is maxing out the Marine Corps PFT.
Yeah, seriously, I can't do that.
So yeah, it took a lot of training, but and so I was able to do that. And so I figured, well, after I failed to make the Paralympics in 2016, I wanted to continue to be a veteran advocate and raise money for veteran charities. And so what I wanted to do with the month of marathons was create a story about a veteran that went overseas and experienced extreme trauma and came back and became stronger because of it and actually thrived from it. And so I wanted to that story to be out there, because the only stories I really saw in the media, and that's news media, movies, TV shows, everything pretty much, was the story of the veteran that went overseas, experiences war, and comes back, a basket case basically, and just kind of implodes and almost destroys the family and that kind of thing. And I just wanted both sides of the story to be out there, because
right.
I felt like you look at the statistics, and 7% of combat veterans come back and have PTS of some sort, and 25% of non-combat troops come back and experience PTS of some sort. So it's the vast minority of people, but somehow we only heard about that story. That's the only story that we heard. And so I didn't want to say, well, we shouldn't be hearing that story anymore, because obviously that's an extremely important story to be hearing. But I just wanted both sides of the story to be out there. So as a person who didn't struggle with post-traumatic stress, that experienced trauma and experienced war, I wanted to just create an example of somebody that, that it is possible for somebody to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And this was my way of doing that, was the month of marathons.
Well, you certainly made that point evidently clear, but you didn't stop there, because July 22nd, 2010 was the date of your injury. July 22nd, 2019, you announced that you are running for Congress in Virginia's 10th Congressional District. Where does this idea come from? How does it start? And, what was the impetus for doing this whole thing?
Sure. What I realized over the course of the time that I did all these things that we've been talking about is that the purpose of my life, the reason that I'm on this earth, is to help other people realize their purpose in life. That's the theme that I've been able to identify that runs through all these things. And so when I kind of moved back home, I realized that the best way for me to be able to help the most amount of people from my home, from where I grew up, is to enter into the role of government and support policies that are going to keep us all on the path of prosperity. And I didn't see our current representative doing that. I think our current representative was actually taking us in the opposite direction, and supporting policies that were going to reduce our prosperity. So I kind of identified that as my the next thing that I could do in order to help as many people as possible in my lifetime.
Now, you are not running as the only, you're running as a Republican, but you're not running as the only Republican going up against the Democratic incumbent. Just another challenge in your way, another hurdle for you to clear, or what?
I would just say, it's certainly going to be a challenge. I'm going to accept whatever the voters decide as the person that they want their nominee to be. And I have great respect for all the other nominees as well. So, I don't really see them as hurdles. I think what I see this as is just helping people decide who they think is going to be the best nominee that they can get, that's going to have the greatest chance to defeat the Democratic incumbent.
Let's say, hypothetically speaking, you win the nomination and you win the election. 2 years down the road after that, and we're in 2022 having this same conversation, what do you hope that people are saying about you as an elected official?
I'm hoping, my plan is that they will be talking about the results that I've gotten for people here, and all of the issues that, that are kind of specific to us, and then also national issues. So, obviously in Northern Virginia, we have a big traffic congestion problem. And so I want them to be talking about the results that I've gotten there. I want them to be talking about the results that I've gotten, protecting the Second Amendment, and the results with healthcare reform and immigration reform and all these things. I want them to be talking about the results. And I also want them to be talking about me being somebody that gives them hope for their own lives. And then also me being somebody that gives them hope in terms of being able to trust and believe in their elected officials again. as people that are selfless and not out for themselves and are in fact out for the best interest of their constituents. And as a person that has really helped us bridge this partisan divide that we're in right now, and kind of bring civility back into the political arena. Those are the things I really want, that I hope that everybody's talking about.
Well, look, it's an amazing, amazing, amazing story. What you've accomplished physically is more than most completely healthy non-amputees could accomplish in a lifetime. And you've done it in a relatively short amount of time. And the cherry on top is that, you're hoping to be one of the people who is going to lead this country and the state of Virginia going forward. And to that, I can't, the inspiration, man, I don't even know how to put it in words, because I feel like it doesn't sell it, doesn't do it enough justice for everything that you've done. It's just incredible. I think that, people can learn from everything that you've gone through, and the fact that you keep pushing forward. And I'm sure there were some dark times for you, Rob. I mean, can you talk about some of those dark times and moments, if they existed, and what they were like for you?
There really weren't very many, to be perfectly honest with you. And they were all, if I did have any, they were very brief, 5-10 seconds at a time. And they all kind of centered around that initial period that I was talking about, where I felt like I felt a little helpless. Not necessarily helpless, but I felt like my capabilities were so reduced, and it was a little bit frustrating. And I felt a little bit like a failure for not being able to find the IED that I stepped on. So this would probably be, but it was very, very rare that I would ever kind of think about that kind of stuff to the point where, I'd get that 1,000-yard stare or whatever for very brief periods. And then to this day, I'm not saying like everything is, sunshine and butterflies and rainbows. Sometimes when I can't do certain things, it is frustrating because I can't do absolutely everything. I can't. An example of this is I had these little wire hangers for road signs for the campaign, and I had maybe 500 of them, and they're all in kind of 30 bundles of 30, and I'm trying to throw them from the back of my truck into this upper part of a barn that we have on my property, and I just can't get the oomph because of the balance. And so it was I got extremely frustrated with that because, when I was able-bodied, I would have been able to throw these things in here one hand, no problem. But here I was like putting out my maximum effort to get these things into that little space, and they just weren't going because I just don't have the lower trunk musculature to balance correctly and throw these things. And so, it's just little stuff like that I can't, that it takes a lot more effort to do, that can frustrate me from time to time. But what I do is I rely on the people around me and on my wife. She and my friend Adam. They went and threw those things up there on my behalf. And I talk about all these things that I've done over the course of the last however many years, and that this is important to point out that I didn't do any of it alone. I was pretty much the one guy at the front that, like in a football game, the running back is running and, he gets stopped by a team of the defense guys. And then his team kind of like are pushing him forward in this big mass. And it's kind of like that, where I have these teams of people that are all kind of pushing me forward in front of themselves, and they're not getting any of the credit, but, none of these things would have happened without those people. So I just rely on the people that I trust in my life in order to get the things done that I can't do myself.
Again, just an amazing set of circumstances that you've overcome, and I don't think this is the end by any stretch, even if this run for Congress doesn't work out the way you want. I know that there is another path for you that I'm sure of the greatest resistance that you will absolutely find to take. It doesn't seem like the path of least resistance.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. I mean, my goal in life is to live a meaningful life and to live an enjoyable life.
Right.
And exemplify courage, brotherhood, and selflessness. So,
amen.
This is just, joining the Marine Corps is one way to do that. Going to the Paralympics is one way to do that. Riding my bike across the country in the monthly marathons, those are both one way to do that. And then running for Congress, I think, is the best way for me to do that right now. But it's just another way that I can do it. And then if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, I will think of something else that can accomplish that goal. So, I have no fear there. And that's kind of why I can be a good congressman and be a good politician, because I know that this isn't the only thing that I can do with my life that's going to help people. And so when it ends, that's when it ends.
Well,
I'll just move on to the next thing.
To that end, Rob, I mean, leadership is the one thing that's missing in politics more than anything. I've said that forever. I'll continue to say it. You can be a politician, but it's probably better to be a leader. You'll go a lot farther in that industry, and a lot more will get done if you choose leadership over politics. And we need more people like you standing up there with the right voice and the right mindset and willing to make tough decisions and, do what's best for everybody involved, because it's the right thing to do. And leadership is paramount. And sometimes in these sort of confusing back and forth times where everything is partisan, leadership never is, because leadership isn't about partisanship. It's about, being out in front and doing what's right and making people understand why you're doing what you're doing and how to get them to agree to it. And again, that is the challenge of all leaders, both in the military and out. And certainly I would expect nothing less from you. Whether you win the seat or not, I think leadership is, where you're headed and harder always at. Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more, man. I think that's a great way to wrap it up.
Where can people go if they would like to find out more about what you're running for, or even if they're not in the state of Virginia, just to help you out and donate? Where can they go?
Yeah, so obviously we've talked about a couple things, a couple different aspects of my life here. So if you're interested in the political aspect of my life now, robjonesforcongress.com is the website. Make donations there. Read about everything that I believe in there. And then the social media handles are Twitter, Rob Jones VA, and then Facebook and Instagram, Rob Jones for Congress. Now, if you don't care about that stuff and you care more about my personal life and my philanthropical endeavors, then you can head on over to robjonesjourney.com, and then all my social media is at Rob Jones Journey.
Again, Rob
and
Jones.
I'm still raising money. I still have. There's still links up on that website where you can donate to the charities that I supported. There's just direct links to the charities themselves. So if you want to donate to any of those charities, then you can do so there as well. It doesn't go through me; it just goes directly to them.
Excellent stuff. Again, thank you so much for your honesty and certainly being so open and willing to share about some of the toughest moments. But again, the overcoming of all those things, I think, is the key part of the story and the inspiration that you are to people who have heard this. So again, I thank you for your time. I know it's precious, so certainly thank you for spending some time with us, Rob Jones, and thank you for being part of the Hazard Ground podcast.
Hey, it's my pleasure, brother. I appreciate you having me on.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.